Rachel, I think this might have been a some kind of first person essay that you wrote because one of my researchers gave it to me, or my researcher, not one of my researcher gave it to me. But I was really struck by this sentence that you wrote. You were talking about your time, of course, in Bachelor Nation, as it's called. After all, they had cast me because on paper I made sense. And you alluded to this in the first half of the podcast. I couldn't be like the Bachelorettes who had come before, somebody who was still living at home with her parents, who had a quote unquote pageant queen on her resume. I was a lawyer. My father was a federal judge. I had a squeaky clean record. I had to be a good black girl, an exceptional black girl. I had to be someone the viewer could accept, and I was a token until I made sure I wasn't. When did you realize, or when did it dawn on you that you were a token?
Oh, from the moment they asked me to be the Bachelorette, I was fully aware of what was happening. And now, when I got asked, I didn't know, and a lot of people think, and actually, the girls in the house used to tell me, "You're going to be the Bachelorette. You're going to be the Bachelorette." I didn't watch the show before, so I didn't think that. All I knew was that Black people didn't go far. So that wasn't even really a thought of mine. I wasn't thinking, "Man, I might be the Bachelorette." It truly wasn't. But they
But
asked me,
why do you think they thought that though about you, that they knew that you would be the Bachelorette?
because according to people who had watched the show before, I was like a unicorn when it came to Black women on the show, or at least Black women that they got to know. And I'm sure there were other magnificent Black women who came before me. They just got kicked off, second or third week. So the audience never had the opportunity to know them. I got the first impression rose. I was there until the very end, top three. So people actually got the chance to know me, to understand me. Those other women who came before me weren't given that chance. So I know that there were exceptional women. They just didn't have the opportunity I had. So I knew the moment that they asked me why they were asking me. And I understood that. And that's why I said no. I said no for a full month when they first asked me. I was like, nah, I don't know. I don't want to lose my reputation as an attorney. Will I have the same respect in the courtroom? What will my friends back home think of me? Will my exes start popping up? I didn't date those type of men. They're like, please don't mention my name, Rachel. Please don't say anything. And I haven't to this day. To this day. Um, but no, I needed to think about it. I needed to go step out of that bachelor bubble, go back into my real life, and then make the decision. So when I finally said yes, my reason for saying yes was because I knew I could represent myself as a Black woman. I knew I could do it well. I knew there were people who stopped watching the show because they didn't see themselves represented. I knew that I could represent myself as a Black woman, as a professional, and I knew I could do it well. And I thought, how many people have either stopped watching the show because they didn't see themselves represented, or have been watching this show and are frustrated because they don't see themselves represented on this show? So I was fine with being their token because I felt like I'm not a token. I know who I am. And as long as I stay true to myself on this show, like I can play your game to a point, but I'm going to use this and carve this as an opportunity to hopefully be a pathway for other people to have this opportunity. My biggest thing when I say yes to doing The Bachelor or The Bachelorette was not to forget my reason for my why I decided to say yes to this. And I think it's pretty clear that I did not forget that. I played the game as long as I needed to get done what I ultimately wanted. And that was to change what I saw as very, very problematic. And as I was the Bachelorette, I saw how big of an issue it was. Not only was I trying to find love on the show, I was having to educate them and be their consultant on Blackness. There wasn't one Black producer on my side. There's a point in the show where I get very frustrated because I'm having an issue about being Black, and I'm looking around and everybody's just looking at me with blank faces. And I'm thinking, okay, gosh, I really want to talk to somebody. And the door opens, and who walks in? Chris Harrison. And I'm like, what's he gonna tell me? What does he have to say? I'm having a moment here. And I was like verbally talking about my frustration with casting, about how I was felt a certain way, how, like y'all pick men you like and not necessarily the men that are for me or that are even down for me at the end of the day. I don't know if I've said this publicly, but I have spoken with people since. And one of the Black men who made it the farthest on my show they did not want on the show. Casting didn't want him because he was from Baltimore and like he didn't necessarily fit the prototype of the Black man that they had. And he was just a little too Black for them. And there was somebody who fought for him to be on the show. That's the person I was attracted to the most. If y'all didn't want him on the show, then I knew the Black men that I date were not coming on the show, whether either because they didn't want to be or because they weren't allowed to be on the show. So it's little things like that that I wanted to change, that I wanted to be vocal about. You can't pick the type of Black men you like. You need to be listening to Black people and what they're interested in, what they like, because we can tell who's necessarily down for us and who's not, which was another issue that I talked about on the show when they made me take a Black man on a date simply because they found it fascinating that he wasn't into Black women, not how problematic that is. Couldn't get that. And I expressed to them, again, remember I was the consultant. I expressed to them, this is a deeply rooted issue in the Black community, specifically with Black women. And you're going to traumatize me by having me experience this on a date because you find it fascinating, because they were saying, this has never been on the show before. Well, it's never been on the show because you don't have Black people as leads. There's a lot of issues in the Black community that have never been on this show because you've never diversified this position. So moments like that, I didn't realize I was going to have to go through when I decided to be their token. Something I also talk about in the book is I didn't realize that how much I was being used. You know, I knew they needed me, but like they were using me just as much as I was using it as an opportunity to represent myself in this role. And that is a lot that I go through in the book of unpacking my experience now that I'm completely removed from it, realizing what I had to go through and some of the issues that I didn't even necessarily get at the time that I can see now that I'm like, my head is out of the clouds a bit.
Well, I am glad that you have decided to be more vocal. And I know it was difficult when you come from a legacy brand like The Bachelor. There's this expectation, and I went through this very similar with ESPN, that when you come from those legacy brands, people have this expectation that you're supposed to be grateful all the time, right? That you're supposed to be grateful for the opportunity that they gave you. And number one, they didn't give you shit. They needed to have you on the show because I'll be honest, I never watched The Bachelor before you got on there. When I heard it was a Black Bachelorette, I was like, I'm in and I'm watching this entire season. And I committed. And it sucked me into Bachelor in Paradise, but that's a whole nother story. We don't want to get into that. The grittier, to me, that's the hood or ratchet version of The Bachelor.
It is.
It is so ratchet. Like I'm all in on Bachelor in Paradise. I don't care about the other stuff. Yeah. I'll fall in love another time. I'm here for people to do disgusting things while in this vacation spot, and everybody can laugh about it, right? So at any rate, I was so appreciative of you becoming more vocal. And one of the things you said, and you just alluded to it, is, and I find this to be, only somebody white would say something dumb like it's fascinating. That shit ain't fascinating. The fact that they would put Black men on the show with you who actually didn't date Black women. Like, I don't even understand, like, what was that supposed to bring to the show other than a bad day for you? You know what I'm saying? So with all the disruption, and I mean disruption in a positive, complimentary way, that you bringing these kinds of issues to the forefront, ultimately, do you think it helped the franchise?
Yes. And I will say yes. Maybe I'm in a nicer mood at the moment. I'll say yes because it stirred things up. You know, these were things that if you really know Bachelor history, which I've learned at this point, I didn't know going in, they had been sued in 2012 for their lack of diversity and inclusion. And the case was dismissed because of First Amendment rights. And basically they flat out said they had the right to discriminate if they wanted to. They could legally do that. Nobody was talking about that. You know, there are interviews where Chris Harrison talked about, you know, we have a certain audience and this show employs a certain number of people and it needs to be successful, and basically justifying why they choose a certain type of lead. It's that rhetoric has been out there, but I really think it took a person who is Black, a person who is a minority, to speak out against it, who's experienced it, lived through it, has a success story, I think that helps as well through it, and then is not afraid to talk about it, because I was billed as the opinionated, sassy attorney, and they loved it until I took those things and then I started to call it out, them out on it. I think it took somebody who, where the Bachelorette is typically supposed to be seen from and not heard. They want you to be desired, pretty, on a pedestal, just something for people to look at, something you're representing, being the most eligible woman in this nation. So when I start to speak out about that and make it a little bit uglier for them and take away the fantasy, I think that helped the show. It might have stirred up some issues. People are mad at me. I'm very polarizing when it comes to Bachelor Nation, and it ultimately had me leave the show. And now things have turned upside down where, the host isn't there anymore, and other people have been called out for the lack of diversity from behind the camera. But I think that's a good thing. And since we've had the show, since I've been outspoken, since I've left the show, you've had more leads of color. You've had more interesting stories that you get to see that there are other sides of Blackness. I think that they've had conversations about things that are happening in the country to Black people on the show that never would have taken place before. And so I'm happy that whether people like me or not in Bachelor Nation, if I was the driving force behind that, then great. I think that makes Bachelor Nation better. Now, they kind of fallen back in the way they were before. It seems that way. But, like that, it's not my job anymore to speak out on it. Like I said what I said. I feel like I've done what I can do. It's now on for the next people to do that. So, we'll see what happens. But I do think it's been a good thing.